Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, I am Justin Daniels. I am a shareholder and corporate M&A and tech transaction lawyer at the law firm Baker Donaldson, advising companies in the deployment and scaling of technology. Since data is critical to every transaction, I help clients make informed business decisions while managing data privacy and cybersecurity risk when needed. I lead the Legal Cyber Data Breach Response Brigade.
And this episode is brought to you by... That's where you make a beep noise.
I thought it would be silence today.
That's a horrible... Would you like to try again? Ding! Red Clover Advisors, horrible co-host. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Well, hello. We're in the non-beepy version of our
podcast, huh? You get the co-host you pay for.
Is it like the Monday blues or something?
No, we're not on a Monday.
Oh my God, you're right. It's Wednesday. Oops. Clearly, I am a little tired. Okay, today I am so excited because we have Daniel Goldberg, who is the partner and chair of the Data Strategy, Privacy, and Security Group at Frankfurt, Kurnit. He advises on a wide range of privacy, security, and AI matters. His expertise spans from handling high-stakes regulatory enforcement actions to shaping the application of privacy and AI laws. And earlier this year in 2025, the California Privacy Lawyers Association named him the California Privacy Lawyer of the Year. And we are so excited and grateful you are here with us today.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Justin.
That's where you are. Do you need like cues today?
No, I'm just annoying you, which is fun. So Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Los Angeles, California. Went to undergraduate here, UCLA, and then traded sides to go to USC Law School. And after graduating law school, I worked at a few firms and ended up at a firm, Baker Hostetler, doing privacy work. And so this is back in 2014. And since that time, I have really focused my entire career on privacy issues and data issues. I came over to Frankfurt Kurnit in 2016, and now I lead the group here. And it's been a terrific journey. And as you can imagine, both of you being in the technology sector so much, like it has changed dramatically just in the last 10 years. So I can't even imagine what it's going to look like in 10 years from now.
I can't imagine what it's going to look like in 10 years either. I'm curious.
5 years. Yeah.
I feel like sometimes privacy people have a favorite part of privacy. Do you have a favorite part of privacy?
Yeah, I really enjoy digging into the weeds of the technologies. I started doing work originally as a data breach lawyer. And honestly, I didn't find it that exciting because it was it's very prescriptive what the laws say. But what I love about privacy is that there's this concept about reasonable expectation. And it's a little bit more about what should consumers be expecting and what are best practices for companies. And so I love digging into the technology itself and saying like, oh, this is a product that a company is looking to launch. Is it something that should they be doing as well? And how does it work and all the elements of it?
I love the intersection, marketing and privacy. So I always enjoy asking people that question because there's so many facets. I talked to someone this morning who loves reading the nitty gritty of all the laws and being able to compare them. So for anyone listening, you probably have a niche and a favorite as well. Now, today, we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty on our good friends in California who have recently put out some updates to their rules and regulations spanning ADMT, which we'll talk about, cybersecurity audits, risk assessments, and more. And I thought we could start on automated decision-making technology, ADMT. And if you could fill us in a little bit on that massive, wide topic and what people need to know.
Yeah, so being based in California and practicing here my entire career, I've been focusing what's been going on in privacy law here, fundamentally. And I've written extensively about the CCPA regs. We've been following this, what is it now, Jody? Like 2 years, 2.5 years? And the version that was recently finalized is very different from prior versions. So I actually have it pulled up in front of me here because I got to look at what the final version says. But per the new version of the regs, an ADMT is any technology that processes personal information and uses computation to replace human decision making or substantially replace human decision making. So I read that as quite broad. I think that it could be interpreted to encompass almost any technology that businesses are using these days. The big question is it triggered? Are the obligations triggered based on what the company is doing with that ADMT? And so that's something we can talk a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, so some people have even gone to, okay, well, I have a spreadsheet and it has a formula in it. What does that mean? Most people are not even taking notes on pen and paper anymore. Some people are using fancy, recorders in their meetings now. So no one's on pen and paper anymore. Like realistically, what do companies actually need to be considering? There's so many different facets of technology. And of course, we even just have our basic spreadsheet that has formulas in it. Where should companies start to try and figure out what is actually in scope for them?
Yeah, honestly, this is something that you really, to the point before about digging into the technology, like you really have to dig in and understand what you're doing. I mean, if it's something that is a generative AI system, I think it's much more likely to fall within the definition of ADMT. To a spreadsheet, I think that's a stretch. But again, it's so specific on what the technology itself is that it really does require a level of due diligence. But to my point before, and this is one of the concerns we had and why the regs took so long to get finalized, is that it's the obligations around ADMT that are the issue. So even if you use an ADMT, most of the obligations are only implicated if you're using the ADMT to make a significant decision about a consumer. And that is something that is quite different than what was before, where there was actually in prior versions a definition around behavioral advertising saying if you're using behavioral advertising, you have to allow for an opt-out and all these different things. Now it's really focused on a significant decision about a consumer, which aligns much more closely to what we see in other laws relating to profiling and such. And I have, again, the definition here of a significant decision. It's a decision that results in the provision or denial of financial or lending services, housing, education enrollment or opportunities, employment or independent contracting opportunities or compensation, or healthcare services. So again, pretty specific. And the other thing that was added in is it says it does not include advertising to a consumer. So while you may be working with an ADMT, the regs are far more narrow what that means for your company and the implications for it.
Well, Daniel, when you talked about a significant decision for a consumer, what I was thinking about is the similarity that has with how Colorado structured their AI law. And so what I want to build towards is, these laws are coming out. They haven't been enforced so much just yet, but can you draw us kind of a picture of the kinds of considerations you should have around these laws, like things that are consumer facing? You have FTC potential issues. Hey, if you're talking to healthcare where significant decisions, that's a trigger. What have you seen connecting the dots on what are some of the fundamental themes of these different laws that, ADMT is kind of taking its lead from.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So a concept that we think about here are these high risk systems. Is it something where the processing operation is in a high risk area? And that follows what we've seen in the EU AI Act. And to your point here, Justin, around Colorado, the obligations have been limited really to these high risk systems. And I think it's pretty similar here. And remember, the other thing is about this law is it is based on the processing of personal information. So, and there were prior versions of this that actually went beyond that, and that was a problem. There were concerns that this reg could be challenged on the grounds that it's going beyond what privacy law provides. So remember, again, this has to be something involving personal data and a significant decision or a high risk system. I do want to be clear, though, that even though we haven't seen public enforcement yet, it doesn't mean that these aren't considerations of regulators. And they are looking at this very closely. And I expect that this will be an area where we will see regulation. But especially if you're a company that's involved in financial services, healthcare provision, this is going to be implicated. Insurance, there's actually new language in the CCPA regs about insurance providers. And of course, there's potential federal laws that could apply here, but there's also carve-outs saying that like where those laws don't apply, these elements will apply too.
Now, some people are saying this specific area is California's way of trying to have an AI law without an AI law. I'm curious for what you think about that.
I think that's very true, Jody. When I was first writing about this again, like 2 years ago, it was so exciting because there were no AI laws at all, right? Like Colorado really didn't have theirs, and it was going to, oh, California is really going to have the first one. And that isn't true at this point. There are actually a number of laws relating to AI. They're just specific to certain types of AI processing operations. There's actually a law that's going to be coming into effect in January 2026 that relates to having to explain where you get your training data from, the sources. And I actually think those types of laws may have a larger impact on a bigger subset of clients. There's actually, with respect to the CCPA regs, and I know we'll talk about this, some elements of the regs to me, like around like the cybersecurity elements, may actually have a bigger impact on a larger group of companies just based on how prescriptive they are and how much, how in depth of requirements they have.
Yeah, I would agree. You agree too.
Sure. Is it my turn to ask a question? You're looking at me.
You get to ask a question now.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's keep going. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh,
it's your turn now.
It's next up perfect timing?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow, I'm getting subliminal notes. So, Daniel, can you talk a little bit more about the mandatory cybersecurity audits? Because that sounds like that's an area like you talked about that will cover more companies, and what should companies be considering around that? Because I'm sure they're not excited to have an audit, but now it's legally required.
Yeah. So this is one of the areas that I think has not been the focus of privacy professionals as much as the risk assessments and the ADMT, perhaps because it's not as sexy. But I actually think this is the area that of the three areas may pose the biggest risk and the largest compliance burden. So essentially, companies will have to conduct a cybersecurity audit if 50% or more of their revenue comes from sales or shares, or they make $25 million plus in revenue and process the personal information of at least 250,000 consumers, or 50,000, the sensitive personal information of 50,000 consumers. So those thresholds are not that high. And so what this means, and there's actually rolling timeframes for these audits, you have to engage an independent auditor, and then you have to go through this comprehensive audit process where you are looking at your entire cybersecurity framework and making sure that it meets obligations under the law. And it actually, can follow NIST 2.0, but as long as it has all the obligations in here of what cybersecurity audits are. And again, there's these rolling timeframes, and they seem like a long way away, but they're not. So April 1st, 2028, if your revenue is more than $100 million for the first one. April 1st, 2029, if your revenue is 50 to 100 million. And then by April 1st, 2030, if your revenue is less than 50 million. So again, if you're a company, so for like the larger companies, this may not be an issue because they're already conducting cybersecurity audits. And if you're subject to obligations under other laws like NYDFS or something, you may already be conducting these audits, or if you have a SOC 2 audit that you're conducting. But for smaller companies that hit these thresholds, if you're a data broker, these are pretty substantial obligations. And the other thing is that it takes a long time to get into compliance. It's not a quick thing. So, I could see there being a rush to get auditors. And, there's a wait time for auditors that is, I don't know, maybe a year or something. We'll see. So this is one of those things that I think you really need to start looking at pretty quickly. Perhaps one of the first things under the CCPA regs.
You seemed very excited to ask a question.
No.
Oh, I had a question. I was waiting. I was being very nice, patient. You were so excited.
Wow.
So you hit on one of the areas that I wanted to emphasize, which is for those companies who might already have a SOC 2, or for companies who have some type of, like an ISO 27001 certificate. Those require a regular audit. And it's my understanding that those audits will suffice for this obligation.
As I read it, they suffice for the obligation as long as they hit all the elements that are required by this law. And from what I understand is that there may be some gaps in there. And so perhaps some of those, will be updated, and we'll see what happens around that to address CCPA. But that's been one of the concerns around the cybersecurity regs here, has been saying, well, they don't exactly track what NIST says. So there is a delta there that I think companies need to look at. And Jody, it may not be a very big thing. It may just be a few things that need to be added on. But we will see. And I'm positive that the audit industry is thinking about this, about how to address it. So it will be incorporated. But again, we'll see where those, how that's addressed.
I think there's a lot of companies who are trying, especially as you said, those smaller companies who are trying to be able to say, no, we really need these SOC 2, certifications and so on and so forth. This will be a way, I think, to help those teams be able to push that forward, which I do think is actually going to be a good thing.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out is that, we've been working with clients who have received requests from regulators, where the regulators are asking questions that are pretty in depth about compliance and compliance with security and privacy. And having a SOC 2 report that you can provide helps so much, just like having an impact assessment. We're going to talk about that in a second. But these are key elements of documentation where a lot of companies have kind of bypassed this to say, oh, it's too expensive. But I actually think doing the work up front helps so dramatically in compliance areas, not just with respect to what's required by the CCPA regs themselves, but what can also help show compliance when when there's an investigation or something else going on.
I love that. And I actually had a conversation this morning with a GDPR regulator who has investigated multiple companies. And what that person indicated was one of the first asks was for a data inventory. And that proactive step, required in some places, but then there was some exceptions, especially for smaller companies. Having a thorough document went so far to say, no, here, we've tried. Look at what we have done and the level of effort that we have put forth. So to anyone listening who was maybe on the fence of trying to get any of this documentation, it really matters because compliance organizations actually care about them. All right. Risk assessments. So you kind of just hinted risk assessments is one of the other big areas. I love me a good risk assessment, privacy impact assessments. Woohoo. I'm excited for this one that has been coming around because what often has we find companies start with the outside in. They start with cookies, they start with notices, they start with privacy rights. I believe firmly on data inventories because they help flag the areas of high risk. And then that's where you should be diving deeper. And California says, yes, we agree, and we're going to require it. Can you talk a little bit about where they might be required and what companies need to get started on now to prepare?
Yes. So, as I mentioned before, ADMT is tied to this concept about significant decisions about a consumer, and that's a defined term. So, risk assessments are actually broader, and it sounds similar, but it's processing that presents significant risk of harm. So that's the key factor for risk assessments under CCPA. And presenting significant risk of harm, there's actually a number of these that come up. There's selling or sharing data. That's a big one. So if you're engaging in targeted advertising, now it is very explicit that you must conduct a risk assessment. Any processing of sensitive information, again, this is going to come up for companies left and right based on just data that they're collecting that may be considered sensitive, precise geolocation data, et cetera. Using ADMT for significant decision, right? We touched on that before. Then there's this discussion about using automated processing for inferring characteristics or other elements when acting for consumers that are job applicants, student, employee, or independent contractor. So this is really focused on in the employment area and decision making in connection with employment, but it is broader than what we see with ADMT for significant decisions. So that's just a notable element. Another one is using automated processing. And again, for inferring characteristics or all these other elements based on a user's sensitive location. And this mirrors things that we've seen in other states. So if you're at a house of worship or a health center, concerns around understanding how users based on their location could have a big impact on users. And so again, that also requires an impact assessment. And then processing, which a business intends to use to train an ADMT for significant decisions. So again, there's ADMT again tied for significant decisions. So there's a lot of stuff that comes up, but I think the place that is most likely going to come up for companies is that selling or sharing or processing sensitive information. Because again, so to your point, Jody, I mean, these are things that companies should already be conducting impact assessments for under other laws, but now California has added on to that.
You literally were thinking exactly what I was thinking, which was this is a requirement under other laws. Based on these rules, do you have a recommendation for companies? Is there anything extra special that they need to consider for CCPA, or just now it's actually required like it was in other places?
Well, there's a few different things. So again, very prescriptive requirements about what needs to go in. And I would say that companies need to look carefully at that. It talks about, and to your point that you were saying before, you can use documentation that you created under a different law for this, but you have to make sure that it's addressing anything that's a gap. And so there may be some elements in there where there could be a gap. There's some specific discussion about if you are processing in connection with an ADMT for significant decisions, you have to identify the logic, you have to identify the output of the ADMT to make the decisions. So again, really interesting in that some specific elements when tied to ADMT. So I would say look at that very closely. The other thing that's important is that after you conduct these impact assessments or these risk assessments, you have to submit an attestation to the agency, and you have to do that. So for any assessments that are conducted between 2026 and 2027, those are due by April 1st, 2028. And what that's going to require is somebody pretty high up in the organization to log in to the California agency's website and basically attest, hey, I conducted impact assessments. In prior versions of this, it was much more comprehensive in that they wanted actually to see copies of these assessments and like the details. And that was struck from the most recent version, which I think there just was no way that there was going to be able to be review of all these. But, if you're going to make that attestation, you really have to be willing to make sure that there's backup of that, because the agency also has a right to request a copy of the impact assessments and what you've done. So you can't just go on there, log in and say, oh yeah, we've done it. That could definitely subject the company to significant risk and a material representation and penalties.
Very, very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing.
So Daniel, when you're out and about, do you have a best privacy or security tip you'd like to share with our audience?
So let me ask you, Justin, is this just generally for when you're talking about for consumers using the internet, or are you thinking about, businesses? Who would you say?
We've had our guests answer all over the gamut, but if you have something special that you want to help just for the consumer, that's great. We've also had ones where it's more business focused. So whatever's top of mind for you right now.
Well, since AI is such a hot topic, and we've been mentioning that earlier, I would just say looking at the settings that you have within any technology that you're using to make sure that it's not using the data for training purposes. There's default settings, and often those settings are on for training or improving services. And so that can create a big risk, especially if you're putting any data into a system that's confidential or privileged. I mean, that could destroy privilege potentially.
And I think that applies to consumers too. Maybe not the privilege side, but just you might not want information going to XYZ software company that you didn't know it was going to be used in a particular fashion. So to review your settings for sure.
Absolutely. I was actually speaking, we do a lot of entertainment related work at the firm here, and I was speaking at an event this past week where there were a number of writers in connection with the Television Academy. And I was saying to them, if you're going to be putting your points into ChatGPT, you definitely want that training off, and you want to consider, again, making sure you understand what you're putting in there, because that data is highly confidential to you. So who knows what they're using that data for if you don't have those settings off. And even so, you still need to be careful with what's going in.
That's interesting you bring that up, Daniel, because the other point I would raise with the people at the Academy, if you're writing it, if they rely on ChatGPT too much to write the article, I'd argue they may not even have copyright over it.
Well, that's a whole different question around the copyright issues. I'd love to have that conversation another time. We talked a lot about that. But yes, you're right. There's questions about the output and how much of that can you be using in your story and all that. Absolutely. Those were questions that I was getting too. But it's both. It goes both ways, because it's also the confidentiality of the inputs.
I just find it interesting because what is an AI lawyer? I think an AI lawyer is somebody who's really good at connecting the dots across multiple disciplines, from privacy, security to IP to commercial terms. It's kind of like AI in our space is kind of an umbrella term for having to have really good expertise in different disciplines.
Yeah, AI really is so broad because it's being used across industries. And this was a discussion, again, I was having at the Academy last week, I was talking about how, we're looking at the regulatory framework, and to your point, Jody, is there are a lot of obligations actually now around AI, but they're very specific and they may not always relate to personal data. So those are two different issues. And these regulations have been trimmed to focus around the personal data, but there's all different issues around publicity and likeness, copyright issues, et cetera. And so AI lawyers have, just like with privacy lawyers, have subset specialties. Is it AI in the context of privacy and data and confidentiality? Is it AI in the context of copyright and IP? So anybody who calls themselves like a pure AI lawyer, I'd be looking at that and saying like, oh, but what's your subspecialty here? Because, everybody's using AI now.
When you are not speaking about AI and privacy and security and reading regs, what do you like to do for fun?
So I love to travel. My wife and I went earlier this year on a trip to South Africa, and it was really fantastic. I just love to see the world, and I love to see so many different places. It's, one nice thing about post-pandemic is it's made it a lot easier to do work remotely. So I'm based in Los Angeles, but I spend a lot of time, our office is in New York, so I spend time in New York, etc. I would say that that's just a really big hobby. And actually, I'm going to a conference next week, which is we do work here at the firm, a lot of video game related work too. And it's the largest video game legal conference, and it's in Vilnius. So it's kind of random, but we're gonna go. She's gonna come with me, and we're gonna go to Vilnius, and fly through Finland too. So if anyone has any recommendations, I'd love to hear it. It's my first time there. I'm only there for a few days, but very intrigued to see it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And what a really interesting niche conference, the Video Legal Conference.
I know, right? Very, very niche. So I will let you know how it is.
That's like the conference we spoke at. We spoke at a trucking legal conference. So there's all kinds of talking about subspecialties.
Yeah, that's my point. Subspecialties, right?
Absolutely. Well, Daniel, it has been so much fun having you. And I really appreciate you breaking down these complex regulations for everyone. If they would like to connect and learn more, where should they go?
Yeah. So if you want to connect with me, I'd love to chat. You can send me an email, dgoldberg@fkks.com, or message me on LinkedIn. And if you're looking for more information about the regs themselves, I would go to the cppa.ca.gov website, and you can find the copy of the modified text of the proposed regs. Honestly, there's no better way than just to read it itself. I know it can burn your eyes after a while, but there's been a lot of time spent on this. And so looking at this text itself is very helpful.
Well, thank you again. We appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. And I would love to come back.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.